Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Lunar Infrastructure Foundational Technology Demonstration 1 Request for Industry Forum. My name is Mike Ching. I'm a technical advisor in the Space Technology Mission Directorate Lunar Surface Innovative Initiative, and I'll be acting as your host today. Today, we'll be presenting an overview of the context of the request for information, the relationship to the Moon to Mars objectives, and we'll also cover a little bit about some of the objectives and the most important aspects itself. As you can see, we'll be having 3 speakers on our panel today. I'll be acting as your host and read some ground rules for the rest of this forum. Ms. Nikki Werkheiser, the Director of Technology Maturation in Space Tech Mission Directorate, will be presenting the bulk of the material for how this fits into our demonstration strategy. And Jerry Sanders will be discussing the technical portions and the objectives of the demonstration. And then we'll have a Q&A session. I encourage you to fill out questions in the Q&A tool as we're presenting. And when we get to those, we will queue them up and cover as many questions as we can in the remaining time available. So let me go ahead and read off the industry forum ground rules for you. The forum is being recorded for purposes of capturing questions and answers. The recording will be posted after the forum in the NSPIRES webpage, and there's a link further down in the next chart. NASA will address questions during the question and answer period after the presentations. Please submit your questions using the Q&A tool, again, during the presentation so that they're fresh on your mind, and we'll address them during the Q&A period as well. Moderators will screen those questions in the Q&A log and queue them up for the panel by either unmuting the individual or reading the question. All questions, both verbal and written, will be documented with answers in the frequently asked questions log, and that log will be posted later on a few weeks after the industry forum. Questions that require further assessment will be resolved soon after the forum, and the answers will be included in the FAQs. The RFI and written answers posted to the FAQs take precedence over all verbal questions or discussions, including this forum and the presentation materials. The deadline for written technical questions is November 24th, no later than 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please submit your questions to the mailbox indicated in the chart, and again, these will be posted. Someone will be also posting these links into the chat section of this WebEx forum. The mailbox for any questions is HQ-STMD-LIFT-1-RFI@nasaprs.com. Following this forum, NASA will post an attendance list for the purposes of collaboration and partnering for those who indicated consent during registration. Again, we're encouraging as much teaming across industry and government as possible. So we're providing this list for your assistance. The presentation materials, the recording, the FAQs, attendance list, and any other RFI amendments will be posted to the NASA Solicitation and Proposal Integrated Review and Evaluation System, also known as NSPIRES. And again, that is https://nspires.nasaprs.com. NASA will not provide evaluations, opinions, or recommendations regarding any suggested approaches or concepts. Again, we have a forum of open dialogue for this session, and we don't want anybody to be revealing concepts that they may not want to reveal. You can search for the RFI page using the solicitation number, which is 80HQTR24L002_LIFT1. And then you can, again, go to the NASA PRS page looking for that and do a search on LIFT-1. Please refer to the RFI itself for further details. There's a tremendous amount of information in there, including instructions on how to submit a response or contact the help desk. It is the responsibility of interested parties to monitor these sites regularly for the release of any updates or any additional synopsis or solicitations that may be forthcoming. So I just want to cover a couple of major key points for the LIFT-1 RFI. Anyone is eligible to submit a response, including individuals, academia, industry, or government, nonprofits, and international entities. Again, we're encouraging collaboration and communication with NASA centers and other government agencies or FFRDCs. Government entities are requested to submit formal RFI responses through NSPIRES. That way we can make sure that we collect all the information and for the responses in one area. Proprietary information is allowed, but we ask you to please properly mark it so we can handle it and treat it appropriately. Respondents may include additional relevant information in their response that may not have been requested by a question. So again, we are looking to gather as much relevant information as we can, and we may have missed an aspect that you would like to bring to our attention. Please do not include private personal information within the RFI responses. We are not equipped to handle that through this specific procedure. So before I go to the next chart, I'd like to introduce our next speaker and panel member, the Director of Technology Maturation, Nikki Werkheiser.
Hi there, I'm just going to do a quick audio check. Is it picking up okay? I'm going to keep going. If we have any issues, just let me know. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to see the turnout here. I think we have over 400 people online, so thank you for your time and for coming today. We want to leave as much time as possible for questions, so I'm not going to go through a whole lot. I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of context, prompt some of the questions, and just talk for just a couple minutes. Then I'll turn over to Jerry Sanders and we'll enter the Q&A. I'll remind you once again, please go ahead and start entering any of your questions now so we can go seamlessly to the Q&A portion of the industry forum. All right, so hopefully I'm just going to I hope that everyone here is familiar with our Moon to Mars strategy and objectives. If you're not, we do have the little code at the bottom of the screen there. You can aim your camera and make sure that you get the latest copy of those. I'm not going to go through all of these here, but I do want to mention there are 63 top-level objectives, and we have those broken out across 10 different top-level goals. This RFI, this effort, will focus primarily on the 13 lunar infrastructure objective. Well, there's 9 lunar infrastructure objectives. That's a little bit of a typo. There's 4 for Mars, but 13 of our lunar infrastructure objectives. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, but I encourage everyone when you're responding to this, if you're not familiar with this document, please take some time to kind of go through it. And even if you're not responding to this, please take some time to go through it. Go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to show kind of our demonstration strategy. Of course, this RFI is coming out from our Space Tech Mission Directorate. And we have several different CLIPS missions that we are taking advantage of through the SMD, our Science Mission Directorate organization. For this RFI, one of the primary reasons we wanted to do this RFI, and it is a true RFI, we are really going to take the responses, go through those in detail, and it will inform not only a lot of our technical planning, but also our acquisition planning and acquisition model that we use. I think many of you might be familiar with our tipping points, which are now funded Space Act agreements. There's also the CLIPS mechanism, and we'll talk a little bit more about our general strategy here. But the focus of this RFI is on LIFT-1, as Mike had mentioned before. This is on our way to an ISRU pilot plant design. We will have a LIFT-1, and the plan is to have a LIFT-2. These are LIFT-1 is to focus on oxygen extraction, and Jerry Sanders will talk a little bit more about that and the plan there. LIFT-2, we will down select a process, whether that be ice mining or oxygen extraction, or we will see how things go. And LIFT-2 will be focused on the process that the pilot plant would intend to use. And so we want to test those in the relevant environment, of course, at the lunar surface. Let's see, and these demonstrations do address 7 of the 9 Moon to Mars infrastructure objectives. So that gives us a lot of data, and we do expect to learn, the F in LIFT for foundational is quite literal. We do expect to learn some very foundational information, no matter how much ground testing we do, really want to test in the relevant environment. If you go to the next slide. There we go. Wanted to talk for a moment. So Mike Ching talked a little about the kind of the mechanism for replying to the RFI. I want to talk a little bit of context and just some of the responses that we're hoping to get. We do strongly encourage leveraging partnerships and collaborations in order to achieve the full demonstration objectives. We do know most of these will be industry-led, and we're strongly encouraging working with our NASA centers, other government agencies, academia, or others. The acquisition approach that we're planning to use for this, we do intend to address the complete mission objectives, meaning this would include launch, landing, the ISRU demonstration itself, as well as anything else, just like in the CLIPS model that you would want to do on the mission outside of this NASA demonstration objective. And so in order to ensure that we are as effective and as efficient as possible, both from timeline and budget and meeting the technical objectives, we intend to minimize prescriptive requirements. We'll really focus more on meeting the functional objectives, and we'll not be prescribing any prescriptive requirements. And Jerry will talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. This will also provide the opportunity, and I think this is really key for industry teams and NASA to co-invest in the required foundational technologies that we need for lunar exploration, both in the senses, I would say, similar to how we do our funded Space Act agreements. We have co-investments there. I think our recent awards were a total value of $260 million, with $110 million of that coming from industry contributions. So I think that's been very effective and efficient. This is an area that we do expect a lot of and anticipate a lot of industry participation in developing these technologies, as well as similar to what the CLIPS missions does. We'll have, of course, the ISRU objectives, but the mission could also include other aspects or other customers outside of NASA's ISRU demonstration. And then in addition to addressing the ISRU-based objectives, I did want to point out that the RFI also includes the request for feedback on several other areas I just wanted to note. First, how to best address scalability of the system itself and things like interoperability. We do understand that this first level demonstration would not be the scale that the pilot plant, the laser pilot plant would be, but we would want to try to understand your approach in general to the design and the process that the system would use and ensure that that is scalable to one day get there. We will be looking at forward-leaning acquisition models. We want to enable the robust and or novel partnering, like I was mentioning, similar to CLIPS models or to our funded Space Act agreements. We have not determined for sure what acquisition model we would use. So again, getting your feedback will greatly help inform not only the technical, but also things like acquisitions. Also, suggestions on data buy opportunities. We think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, and would like to hear more from you guys. If you are members of our Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium, you'll know that they've done several surveys for data buy topics, and so we'd like to get the same kind of feedback from this community. Also, interest in things like potential for government-provided ESPA to expand the customer base and mission opportunities. We are planning questions like this. This is really just prompting thought. This is one example, but how could we, the government, I'll say, not just NASA, but possibly the government, make this mission more, expand again the customer base and make it more profitable or more of a business plan for the partnering contributions from other potential mission customers or users. Also, mission integration support functions. That's another area where we'd be interested in knowing, is that something that obviously you'll be doing some of your own integration if you plan things like this, but with some form of mission integration support functions, especially if we have things like the ESPA or other type of additional aspects of the mission, be helpful. And then lastly, and importantly, Mike had mentioned, it's not limited to this information. We do welcome any other relevant information that you do want to include for feedback or you think might help to inform the process or the plans going forward. And with that said, I'm going to turn over to Jerry Sanders now, our ISRU SME, to talk a little more about the
thank you. So let me do a mic check as well. Fantastic. So as Mike and Nikki basically pointed out, and several of the other charts, we're trying to do two things. One is we're trying to look at the longer term perspective, heading out to pilot plants and to full scale development, and LIFT-1 is the first step in that direction. The other is that we are trying to minimize the what kind of requirements that we impose. So if you look at the RFI, we provide some guidance as to what we have thought in the past were the most important attributes. But the purpose of the RFI is for all of you to come back now and tell us if we were right or wrong. And in particular, if you look at this chart, the emphasis of this demonstration, LIFT-1, is in the dark green box there, oxygen production. That said, for ISRU to actually occur, a number of other aspects need to come into fruition for this mission. One is obviously being able to establish lunar presence, be able to land and operate on the lunar surface. Another is regolith operations. The only way we can actually process regolith is if we can acquire it and transfer it. And then finally, ISRU and power are intimately connected. As ISRU grows in size, the amount of power we need grows. So when you look at these four areas, within each of them, we have designated the light green boxes as things that we would think would be essential for this mission to occur. At the same time, we recognize that there are other aspects that while you're doing these things, it may be fortuitous to add another capability or examine another aspect of lunar infrastructure that's going to be important downstream. So those are the optional or semi-orange or yellowish boxes. And so with that in mind, I think I've covered this general idea as to where we want to go, and we can open up for questions.
Yes, everyone, we've, again, this is the question and answer period of the session. We do have moderators looking at the Q&A tool. I encourage you to, if you do have questions, to go ahead and submit in that tool. And we have a moderator who can queue up the questions for us.
Mike, I'm just going to ask one general question that everybody has first of all. And can you let everyone know where the slides and the Q&A will be made available after this forum?
Okay, there is an address on the second chart of the ground rules for where everything will be posted. And it's also posted in the chat for this WebEx. So
But it's, they can't get to
okay,
charts and see that.
okay. So on the last
Hey, then-
major.
I'm sorry. Then we have a question from Ben Goodman. I will open his mic and he can ask the question.
Sorry, I'm copying these to the Q&A tool from the chat.
So then I'll ask this question is the LIFT-1 scope limited to oxygen from regolith, or does it include oxygen from icy regolith?
So I think if you look at our presentations from the past, we have been looking at basically a dual path: oxygen and metal from regolith, water and other volatiles from permanently shadowed craters. We have a tremendous amount of knowledge of lunar regolith from Apollo missions, as well as from orbital measurements about the mineralogy and such. So it made sense that primarily focusing on oxygen extraction of some sort from the minerals in the lunar regolith made sense early on, especially with the fact that if you look at oxygen as a product on its own, it's typically a significant amount of the propellant mass. It's used for life support systems. We will be continuing to pursue water and other volatiles. The fact that Prime 1 and Viper are in the mission data sets already. And as Nikki pointed out, we may revisit water mining and water prospecting or resource assessments as we get further information from Prime 1 and Viper and other missions, we would highly encourage more of the oxygen from metals at this, or from minerals at this point.
Okay, I think we're ready for the next question.
So our next question comes from Scott Johnson. Let me just unmute him.
Hi, can you hear me?
Your mic is open. Yep.
Okay. So in looking at the chart of objectives concerning this RFI, I noticed that column solutions were listed in the left in light green. Is the primary focus of this going to be O2 production, or are communication solutions within the scope of this RFI?
Well, I would say that it would have to support the oxygen demonstrations and processes.
Mm-hmm.
If it also supported other hardware associated with it. So for example, I think in one of the yellow boxes, it has a mobile platform or excavator of some sort, which might require some level of communications. So I would say that should be the primary focus of the communication aspects.
Yeah, let's be a little more,
But-
I want to be really clear. So what we're trying to do here, and one of the reasons we really like doing the ISRU demonstration, it's in order to do the ISRU functional objectives that we want to meet. You really do obviously have to have, it has all these other ancillary areas that you have to prove out, right? You have to have power, you have to be able to move or get to where you need to get to, or excavate, or have autonomy, those kind of things. So how we kind of design this is the ISRU aspect of the objectives that we listed in the RFI are the functional objectives of this demonstration. That is what we will be, quote unquote, I guess, grading, or what the solicitation would be. But we have included in the RFI, and this is what we want to hear some feedback on. We would still like to have information and feedback and understand how you approach those, what we're calling those objectives, such as power.
Yes.
Because what we're really focused on here is getting the TRL up the chain, right? For all of these areas, for integrated mission toward the ISRU functionality. So while we're not going to necessarily dive down too deeply into the type of processes or technologies that you use, we do want to use this mission to help get that TRL matured and advanced.
Can I follow up with a comment?
Sure.
Okay, so when we're considering communications in any of these devices that are going to be placed on the lunar surface, I think we should make a focus to consider those to be networked in a fashion that allows further expansion of a lunar network presence, or a lunar internet that allows us to leverage things such as strong time sources like cesium clocks in a single landing device that can then be networked and provide stable time to lesser clocks in other devices. Just as an example of the utility of making sure that we are well networked in the devices that we put down, just speaking to the communications aspect of it. Thank you.
The only thing I would add, and that sounds great, and again, we're looking for responses as such. The mission itself, if you look at the RFI, is not required to survive a lunar night.
Mm-hmm.
So recognize that aspect, and while we are open to hearing more about greater capabilities than that, that is the minimal going in position at the moment.
Yeah, and I really do want to stress too. So this RFI is focused on we want to enable this mission, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from this mission, what we would want to, the objective we want to meet is the ISRU O2 extraction. With that said, again, this would be very similar to the CLIPS model in the sense that the mission can have other objectives, you can have other customers. We fully expect CLIPS vendors and others would be interested in propose. So it doesn't mean that the ISRU objectives have to be all for the mission. That's just what this particular NASA acquisition would focus on.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready for another question.
And our next question is coming from Astrobotic Technology. Astrobotic, you're unmuted to ask your question.
Do we have a representative from Astrobotic to ask that question?
If they can type it in the chat.
If not, we could have the moderator read it.
Their question is the potential government-funded ESPA ring presumed to be for lunar orbit?
Presumably, but again, this is truly an RFI, so we want to hear your thoughts or your feedback on that. We're opening up the concept. And so provide feedbacks. And they do say they're on force mute, so I think the moderator would have to unmute them for them to speak. But yes, provides your ideas, but that is the general thought, right? Is cislunar.
Then just a reminder, when the moderator unmutes you, I believe you have to actually unmute yourself as well. Okay, I think we're ready for
Our next question is from Bat Chen. You are unmuted if you want to ask your question.
Yes, thank you so much. And
Oh, we just lost you. Could you repeat the question, please?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you
Yes,
so
we
much.
can hear you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask the question. I just wanted to verify if non-American companies can submit an answer to the RFI.
Yes, so for the RFI itself, and since this is not an RFP, anyone can respond, anyone at all to the RFI. Yes.
And what about the RFP?
We will see. It depends on some of our acquisition models. Most of our acquisition approaches, the international are not leads, or they would need to partner or have a U.S. subsidiary, but we have not determined that for this, and the RFIs will be helping to inform that.
Okay.
One of the question areas is what type of agreement we might want to seek to execute this. And so whatever that might be, when we put out that solicitation, we'll put the instructions for the eligibility in that instrument.
And the other thing I'll note is that this is also informing our overall path to the ISRU pilot plant. I should note that it's not NASA's intention to own or operate the pilot plant. We want that to be a technology that we're enabling, a capability that we want to have developed so that we can be one of the consumers or one of the customers of the products produced. But so the acquisition approach for the pilot plant, we want to use the same general approach and structure for these demos as well going into that. So that will influence it.
Thank you so much for the answers.
Absolutely.
Okay, and we have a question from the chat that I want to ask. The question is, what is the vision for power infrastructure as ISRU needs constant supply of power if we go with extraction? Will it be a solar grid or something completely different?
So I'll let Jerry answer, but I will say this, and I know this is weird coming from NASA and everybody's probably saying, tell us what our requirements are, but truly the approach of this is to not be overly prescriptive. So for example, we have a multitude, really a plethora of, things like SBIRs, tipping points, the HLS work that's underway and next step BAAs, all kinds of work that's underway with companies and others that are taking different approaches, different processes, or have a secret sauce. We are purposely not wanting to prescribe that as part of this. We want to hear from you guys. And so ours will be focused again on whatever you need to do to put together a demonstration that can meet those ISRU objectives. Obviously, you will need power to do that, some autonomy, robotics, mobility, all those things. And so we want to understand your plans. We want to feel confident that there's some fidelity and an approach there. But the way I see this is, and the reason that we feel like it was time to release this, and we've been planning this for some time now, is between all the tipping points we have, the NASA-led projects that also have industry partnerships, SBIRs, and all these other activities. I feel like there's enough technology maturation in the candidate pool now being developed that you can almost say it was the start of this mission. This mission is an infusion point for those capabilities. So we won't be prescribing, but certainly some of the ones you listed are examples of the types of power capabilities we could use.
Yeah, I'd add two things to this. One is the RFI in the charts we just showed talk about the pilot plant and commercialization downstream. And so what we're really asking is your visions for how to achieve those downstream objectives, and how do you use this first mission as a way of buying down the risk of achieving those larger goals. So we want to hear what power systems you see being needed downstream, as well as how you would transmit that. The second thing I would say is on that chart, that's kind of schedule chart, you hopefully would notice that besides the ISRU LIFT-1 heading towards a pilot plant, you also should notice that there's a fission surface reactor demo in there. What's missing is we've also, STMD is funding VSAT and other technologies that are associated with power systems, with the idea, again, that we kind of incentivize and we kind of develop the basic capabilities that industry and others can take and run with. So how those all factor into the overall strategy are very important as part of the RFI.
Okay, our next question is from Vinayak Vadalamanani. You are unmuted and you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. My question is, in the scope of the RFI, what's the limitations on its association with the existing co-funded programs like CLIPS or HLS?
So this is a mission infusion opportunity, right? When I talk about all the different technology maturation activities that are currently underway, the pools of activities there, CLIPS is absolutely part of that. We've worked very closely with the Science Mission Directorate on this, and it is open, obviously, and we fully suspect that we will have CLIPS vendors very interested, but it's just not limited to CLIPS vendors. But yeah, any of the existing work, material maturation services that folks are developing that could benefit this mission to meet those ISRU objectives are highly encouraged.
And with respect to whether NASA owns this mission or not, I think we've all said in the RFI and even here is we really want to understand what the role of government and NASA is, depending on the way you look at going forward.
I would add that we realize that there are very few companies that would probably have an end-to-end mission capability, including the launch and the lander and the integration of the ISRU demonstration and operations itself. So that's why we recognize the importance of teaming in this. And so if you are a smaller company, for example, that has an expertise in just one of the system areas, again, we would like to see what your solution might be to team with others to provide the end-to-end mission capability.
Yeah, and I want to pull on that. That's one of the primary reasons that we are hosting and asked with permission, if you click the box when you register for this, to share this attendance list. As much as the technology maturation is a discussion and a priority, it's not probably what keeps me up the most at night. It probably is more that folks are working together in timeframes that we're doing this and really partnering in a strategic way to meet that whole kind of full mission profile. Other thing I'll say is if you're not a member of the Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium that Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab facilitates, there's a lot of discussion that's been going on for the last 3+ years there around this exact kind of approach and what we're doing now. And so there'll be more discussion there as well. And it's a really good community to kind of do that, I guess I would say speed dating or networking, meet folks and looking at potential collaborations or partnerships.
Okay, our next question comes from Charles W. You are unmuted and you should be able to ask your question.
Yeah, so the NASA's knowledge of the regolith locations, et cetera, will that be available in a central location? If so, where?
Planetary data.
Yeah, I mean, I would highly encourage you to partner with maybe some of the survey teams or universities that have the expertise, because the amount of information on regolith and the moon is astronomical. So if you're coming at this, with a clean sheet of paper, you probably want to get in touch with some experts on the subject. We do not plan on, providing some kind of a site with recommended information, other than I always turn to the Lunar source book as my first go on any question associated with lunar regolith.
Yeah, there are several resources there. It helps to get in with folks that have been kind of working this. Or you can also, again, talk to folks as part of the LSICT and APL. They can point you to those references. Survey, as Jerry mentioned, as well. And then the Artemis, the landing locations are published, aren't they?
Yes, so we're
not limited to those that we'll mention.
No, but we published, I think, the 13 some sites that have been tentatively identified as areas of landing sites of interest. So I would encourage you to look into the references associated with those sites.
But we do not plan to limit to those sites, but that would help inform, or you can actually see how they selected those. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, our next question comes from Chuck Taylor. You are unmuted.
I'm sorry, I think the question was really already answered. I asked about the expected mission duration, but I was concerned with surviving the night, obviously associated with the power generation system. I think you asked or answered that in the form of another question earlier.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ellen Norman. You are unmuted and you can ask your question.
Afternoon all. I was just wondering how much emphasis should be attributed to the scalability of the LIFT-1 concepts, but in mind would be larger scale activities in the future. How much would you want to be these proof of concepts to be taken forward, or are they just one shots to enable this mission?
This is a standalone mission, but I guess what we're trying to say too is, hypothetically or theoretically, you could develop a very specific and finite process or approach to meet the very narrow objectives of this mission that would not be conducive to scaling in any way, and that would not be considered, because we do know that the process that's used here is one that would have to be scalable, so it could be considered downstream for something like a pilot.
Yeah. Yeah, we purposely are not saying a production rate or a mass or a scale, other than the fact that how does this particular demonstration buy down the risk of your larger hardware downstream? And if you're demonstrating something that requires you to completely redesign it to go to the next scale up, you're probably not gonna make the mark that you really need to.
Yep. Thank you.
Our next question is from Artie Matthews. You are unmuted and can ask your question.
Hi there. I guess maybe following on a little bit from the previous question, but can you talk a little more about how you plan to incorporate the RFI responses into the plan for the mission design or objectives themselves? Like, for example, will it inform the objective around the required O2 either for the demonstration or for the sort of long-term sustainable goals? Thank you.
Yes, it absolutely could. Again, we do see NASA as not being the owner or even the leader for developing ISRU technologies and capabilities, but we do want to facilitate the capability happening, because we would like to be customers of purchasing those consumables. So with that said, that's why I really stress this is truly an RFI in every intent, both from the technology approaches, even the path to the pilot plant, as well as the acquisition models themselves. I do think with budgets being what they are, and the fact that we don't want the government to be kind of the owner of the technology or the operator of the technology. That it is very important again to have kind of the novel acquisition, partnering and collaborations that we're kind of in this together, which again, leveraging things like the CLIPS models or other service-based contracts or tipping points, I think will really help. But yes, in every sense of the intent of an RFI, it can and will form our process. We will take all of the RFI inputs, and we're doing a feasibility study. This is not the only component to the feasibility study, but it is a huge one, huge aspect, and then we will take that forward for the RFP proposal development. And again, this is a good time for me to stress while we're talking about that. That is our reason that we would like everyone. It's a little bit non-traditional, but we would like every responder to this RFI, including government responders, including even our NASA centers, to respond through the Inspires system, because we do want to make sure that we get kind of all the integrated responses so we can look at, trending and themes and metrics and all those kind of things as part of the feasibility assessment as well.
So one question that just came in was what was the name of the Johns Hopkins collaboration? I have placed it in the chat. It's called the Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium. It is the email and the link to it is in the chat, and it will be also in the responses. Our next question.
Well, Carol, one thing on that real quick, I just want to mention it's free for anyone to join that. It is also anyone can join, internationals or to participate, international students. We have a large academic contingency, industry, we have small business, large business, and non-traditional business as well, or participants as well. So yes, I encourage you to take a look at that.
Thank you, Nikki. Our next question comes from Kieran Carroll. You are unmuted and can ask your question.
Thanks. So I guess I'm trying to go past or think past the RFI process to figure out, whether what we have to tell you will be of interest to you or not. In terms of what comes after the RFI, there'll be an RFP for the LIFT-1 demo mission. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you will be looking for, will be proposals from consortia, essentially, to do the LIFT-1 mission. That will probably have a prime contractor that'll do the system engineering, and then there'll be smaller contractors in there doing bits and pieces. Is that the sort of vision of what you have in mind?
In our current ecosystem and a lot of the feedback we've received over the last 3 years or so in LSIC, I probably would not even be, that is certainly one model, but I probably would not even be that finite or that specific. I mean, you could use consortium in a really loose term in the sense that what Jerry and Mike had mentioned earlier, that there are probably very few companies out there that, from end to end would do the launch, the landing, and the ISRU demonstration. So it's going to require some collaborations and partnering, I would guess. But we truly do not want to put those type of parameters around it on how that's done. We are very open. For example, you could have CLIPS vendors, they go and hire. A lot of CLIPS vendors will hire their like another company for launch. They will provide lander. They may have different government customers, different international customers, including NASA as one of them for their missions. I see this as being very much the same as that. So what you mentioned would be one model that could be proposed or would be effective for this, but really would not limit it to that.
Yeah, and I would add, Karen, the fact that you did jump to the RFP, and as we've said, part of the RFI is really to understand also the acquisition approach and the kind of teaming approach. So while you may come from an individual part of the box or several of the boxes versus the whole thing, we still want to hear how how you would or your company would look at going forward as the most opportunity for small businesses or help in forming these kind of things. So again, it's an RFI, and what we get out of the RFI will go into how we actually do then approach the RFP downstream.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and talk that for a moment because I'm seeing lots of questions here in the chat just regarding budgets and tying into acquisition approaches and schedules. So this is indeed has been submitted, obviously, and we've been planning for this for quite some time into our budget request as part of the president's budget request. But as everyone knows out there, that doesn't necessarily always equate to the appropriations we get. So I think regardless of the approach, it will require partnering, and that's why we want to make this as flexible and agile and as large of a customer base as we can for this mission. While NASA will certainly be investing similar to we do into our BAAs or into our funded space acts with the tipping points or into CLIPS. I do think it's going to take kind of that ecosystem being behind this and having, broader customers and also partnering for the launch, landing, and demonstration itself. So yeah, that's the plan. Someone asked here, would it be a similar budget to the CLIPS missions? Again, RFI will truly help to inform that. We do have a particular budget in mind, but we want to validate that. It's definitely going to require the partnering with industry or others to achieve that.
Nikki, there's a follow-on question that came in privately, and it regards kind of the funding. And it says the funding statement indicates that commercial partners contributing support are especially interesting. It's read that this is to preclude small companies and academia unless partnered with a large corporation. Is that a reasonable supposition?
No, because I would say if you're not familiar with our tipping points that we just awarded, I would highly recommend going to our Space Tech website and reading a little bit about the Funding Space Acts. We do have requirements in there for industry contributions, but we do scale those for our smaller businesses. So I think it's maybe, don't quote me, a 10% or something like that for our small businesses and 20% for industry, larger industry. So again, it does take, but also a lot of times our small businesses are looking at more of a specific technology or capability development and are looking for larger industry or NASA partners. And again, I want to mention our NASA centers, both from a facilities perspective and skill sets. We have a lot of expertise at the NASA centers. I think we have lots of folks online today from our NASA centers that are interested and have a lot to contribute, as well as the test and other facilities that they have available through Space Acts as well.
Yeah, I'd like to encourage folks that if that is a barrier, to please document that in a response and let us know what we might be able to reduce those barriers to the maximum extent.
So we have two questions related to landing sites, so I'm kind of going to ask them both together. One of them is the criteria for the selection of the landing site from an ISRU perspective? And the other question was, is the polar region considered the likely target of LIFT-1? So they're kind of similar questions if you guys want to answer those.
Well, I'll go with the latter part, and that is NASA's intent at this point. The Artemis program is focused at the South Pole for many reasons, resources being one of them, solar environment, science. So for LIFT-1, it's fairly clear that we want to be at the South Pole initially, and hopefully in line with an area that has interest by both the human exploration side of the house as well as the science mission directorate side of the house. So hopefully that answers that second part.
And I would say, anybody that gets really serious about partnering or proposing to this, you're going to have customers or be developing a business model, right? And so where you go and how you achieve it is going to be very specific or dependent upon your business model, which again is why we're leaving this very agile and flexible. I know it sounds like we may not be answering the questions in a really specific or finite way, but that's on purpose because we do feel that most of the folks that will, or I think everyone I can safely say that would respond to this in one fashion or another has a technology or a business model or a mission that this would be an infusion point for.
I would just add that both Jerry and Nikki have pointed out that the purpose of this is really as a risk reduction activity. And if that is where we eventually believe we'll need to produce resources We think that that's probably the most advantageous would be to target the areas where we will actually be operating. So that probably provides the maximum amount of risk reduction. But again, there are different ways of approaching things, and if there are other approaches that you may have, we're interested in seeing that in your response.
Yeah, let me address, Carol, there's one question on here I'm gonna go ahead and just address because I think it's such a fundamentally important one. And it may be so fundamental that we might have missed answering or making it really explicit in the RFI because it's so inherent to what we're trying to do here. So the question was, should every RFI response address the full scope of the LIFT-1 demo system? How I would answer that is, we do not require that, right? It's about the ISRU demo, but what I would say is that I can pretty much guarantee that the acquisition approach we use, as we mentioned here, will include the whole kit and caboodle, launch, landing, ISRU demonstration, right? So if you do respond focused on one capability or another, number one, you would have to address the ISRU aspect because that will be the functional objective of the mission. But number two, it would behoove you and others involved or to use this opportunity as a way to seek others, right? Or to partner with or to collaborate with others that for an RFP, it would come in as an integrated mission proposal, just like with CLIPS, for example. So no, you would not have to do that for the RFI, but I would say just like the scalability question on your path to an RFP, you would need to be able to, how much time or energy you spend on this would be dependent on having a viable path to partner with the RFP for a full mission.
Okay, I believe we're ready for the next question. Do we have another one, Carol, or have we worked through all of them?
Our next question is from Liam Murray. He's unmuted.
Thank you. Am I able to be heard?
Yes. Yes.
I was curious about the mobility systems you're leaning to extract the regolith for the ISRU systems. I know there's concepts like Scarab or wire connecting rovers, and like your crater of interest being like Shackleton. Has anything been tested near the 40-degree slopes to handle extracting regolith?
So here again, we're looking for feedback from people as to what makes sense for their particular systems. And we are not aiming towards any one particular mobility platform or other.
Yeah, so in this, you'd be putting together a demonstration mission, right? So just like the other questions that came up here, number one, what ISRU process you would need to use would dictate, like in Jerry's chart that he showed, the different ancillary systems, including mobility, where you would decide to test that process to meet those functional objectives. The landing site you would choose would also dictate or help to inform at least what mobility systems you would need. So again, that's all going to be interdependent on the process and the approach that you would want to propose or to share as part of the RFI. Now, what you may be asking, or hold on one second, Carol, let me make sure I answer this. What has been done, and again, so in the LSIC, in the consortium, I mentioned two different sets of resources. The consortium, we have 6 different, what we call focus groups that meet monthly right now, virtually, and everything is published. We also have a series of workshops on different topics, including ISRU. We had we called it the chicken and egg workshop.
Supply and demand, yes, which is the same thing.
Mobility, autonomy, and robotics. So we have a lot of groups there. We have an APL facilitator that leads that focus group, but they are partnered with our NASA subject matter experts in each of those 6 areas. For example, Jerry is the NASA focal for the ISRU group that's part of LSIC. So what that allows and enables APL to do, they get both independent feedback from the external participants or participants in LSIC, but they also stay anchored to and tethered to what the plans are within NASA, the current architecture and studies that are underway and the priorities there. And they kind of synthesize all of that in what we call our technology gap assessments. So you can always reach out to the LSIC folks that Carol had mentioned here that we posted, and they can help either talk to you directly, or they can also point you toward our NASA subject matter experts. We do have that too for mobility, autonomy, and we have our envision future priorities. And so we will make sure, we'll make sure here that lists our technology gaps in each of these areas. And you can learn a lot too about different approaches that are being taken to close those gaps within and external to NASA. So we can post a link on how to get to those envision future priorities in addition to the Moon to Mars objective.
And they are in the RFI as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you have not looked at the Envision Future Priorities presentations, just like the Moon to Mars objectives document, please do so, because that will help you hopefully understand some of the direction that we're talking about.
Orient and calibrate.
Yep.
Okay, our next question comes from Laurent. Laurent, you are unmuted and can ask your question.
Is it in the chat?
Since his mic.
Yeah, I'll ask his question. His question is the demonstration of interoperability and of multiple assets an essential for LIFT-1?
I wouldn't say essential per se, but just like scalability, we are looking for the longer term aspect of interoperability and maintainability. And so how would LIFT-1 help you move in that direction and again, buy down risk or enable the kind of collaborations that need to occur as we head towards the pilot plant and full scale production aspects?
Yeah, and let me say clearly, we Space Tech are not enacting interoperability standards or requirements. It's more that from the technology developers, a lot of times we will get questions or comments about the interoperability approaches for some of the business models being used in industry, and how to vet those or to share those, how to get tied in with what NASA's plans are for the interoperability standards and approach. So we did want to include that there for consideration and really welcome any feedback that you might have. We are sharing this feedback too with our other stakeholders within NASA, our exploration systems and our science mission directorates. So that would be useful if you want to share.
Have time for one more question.
Well, actually, if we only have one more question, I'm just going to ask two questions that are out there that I think that need to be answered. One of them is, what is the next step after the RFI responses are received?
So after the RFI responses are received, we're going to do a 2 to 3 months. We'll have to break in between there, though. We've already started what I call a feasibility assessment for the LIFT-1 mission. As I mentioned earlier, the RFIs are critical inputs to that and could definitely impact, inform, or change the current model that we have. But we do have some other aspects of the feasibility assessment we're doing as well. That would be an integrated product that would help inform the RFP. Like I said, the actual objectives themselves, as well as the acquisition approach. And then we would be working on developing and improving that for release. Our goal would be to do this mission late calendar year of 2027. That's what we've submitted as part of our budget request. That's when we would need to do that. If you look at our pilot plant kind of strategy or roadmap planning and what we've been working toward, that is, I will say, dependent on our appropriations and the budget received. Obviously, but that is our goal, would be to release an RFP. We're hoping in late summer of 2024.
Okay, and our last question for the day is a great one. If there's a government shutdown after Friday, will the RFI submit date slip?
We will have to probably defer the answer to that, and we'll provide it in the written responses. That's something that we're working through ourselves this week on a multitude of topics and issues, and hope that it won't happen, but we're planning for in case it does. And we will respond with that in writing once we have a clear answer.
So I would like to thank everyone for their time. We appreciate your interest in this activity, and again, we're very interested in hearing your inputs on what you might have to contribute. So as we go into our feasibility study and develop the concept for how we want to pursue this. Again, I encourage you to monitor the Inspires page for any additional questions, amendments, or changes. We will post all the materials from this presentation, including the questions that were asked and additional questions that have been submitted to the mailbox. The mailbox is posted in one of the charts. I apologize, we should have put it on this last chart. But again, we will be open for questions through 5 p.m. Eastern time on November 24th. And again, thank you very much for your time.
One last thing I just wanted to say for the RFI, please feel free to reach out to any of the NASA centers or folks. We do not have any form of blackout for an RFI process. Of course, once we enter into RFP process, we will. So I strongly encourage folks to make those connections earlier rather than later. Thank you.